When I was just a kid, around 8 years old, strange things started happening in our house. My parents, bless them, had me late in their lives, and my siblings were way older than me. One spooky night, I woke up to the sound of chaos downstairs. Creeping out of bed, I heard my parents' voices, panicked and frantic. I couldn't quite make out what was going on, but something felt seriously off. I tiptoed to the top of the stairs and called out, "Mom? Dad?" My mom appeared at the bottom of the staircase, her face tight with worry. "Go back to bed," she whispered. I didn't dare argue, but the tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Eventually, I drifted back to sleep, the events downstairs forgotten in the haze of exhaustion. But then, the front door slammed shut, jolting me awake once more. Silence engulfed the house, and I strained my ears, trying to make sense of it all. Had my parents left again? I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. As I lay there, the night grew darker, and a chill settled in the air. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Faint at first, then growing louder and more distinct. It sounded like someone was moving around downstairs, rifling through drawers and cabinets. I told myself it was just my brother Chris, returning home late like he often did. But deep down, I knew something wasn't adding up. The footsteps drew closer, until they reached the top of the stairs. My heart pounded in my chest as the door creaked open, revealing a shadowy figure. I called out names, but there was no response. Just silence, thick and suffocating. Terrified, I stayed frozen in bed, watching as the figure retreated downstairs. Curiosity got the better of me, and I followed, my pulse racing with each step. What I saw in the kitchen made my blood run cold. A tall figure standing in the darkness. "Dad?" I whispered, but the voice that responded wasn't his. It was deep and chilling, sending shivers down my spine. "Go back upstairs," it commanded. I didn't need to be told twice. Running back to my room, I huddled under the covers, my mind reeling with fear and confusion. When my parents finally returned, I was desperate for answers, but what they told me only left me more terrified than before. It turns out Chris had been in an accident, a close call that left my parents rushing to his side. They hadn't been home at all, leaving me alone in the dark with a stranger. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks, and I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that lingered in the air. My parents called the police, and I watched as they searched the house, their guns drawn and ready. The memory of that night still haunts me, a chilling reminder of the darkness that lurks just beyond our doorstep. Around 2014-2015, my family moved into a new house to be closer to school and save some money on rent. It seemed like a nice place, with a cozy fireplace for the winter chill. My little brother, who was about 7 or 8 at the time, loved playing with his Batman car. It made all sorts of noises and lit up, his absolute favorite toy. One day, he came inside from playing and showed us something he found. A school photo tag, worn and dirty, with a picture of a young boy. My mom and I assumed it belonged to some kid in the neighborhood. But then my brother dropped a bombshell. "That's Buddy," he said, pointing at the picture. "He's my friend." This caught us off guard because my brother didn't make friends easily, and we'd never heard of this Buddy before. But we brushed it off, thinking he'd made a new friend in the neighborhood. Then things started getting weird. One night, around 3 a.m., I woke up to my brother talking in his room. Irritated, I went to tell him to go back to sleep, but when I entered his room, he was sitting up in bed, having a full-blown conversation with no one. A few days later, my mom mentioned that my brother had been acting strange at night. It gave me the creeps, but we chalked it up to him being a kid. One night, I woke up to a noise, my brother's Batman car, making its usual racket. I went to tell him to knock it off, but he was fast asleep, and the toy was on the floor, still making noise. I turned it off and went back to bed, but it kept happening every night. My brother wouldn't stop talking about Buddy, and it was starting to freak me out. I checked with the neighbors, but none of them had kids. My dad brushed it off as an imaginary friend, but it didn't explain the weird stuff happening with the toy. My sister and I started sleeping in my room together, but one night, we heard the toy again. We looked out into the hallway and saw it rolling past my brother's room on its own. We screamed and ran to our parents, who thought it was just a prank. But then my brother said something that chilled us to the bone. It wasn't me, but he wanted to play. We threw the toy away, but it kept coming back. Eventually, it ended up smashed to pieces. But even then, weird things kept happening. Like the George Foreman grill flying across the kitchen when no one was near it. We moved out a year later, but I still wonder, was Buddy really just imaginary? When I was just 10, my family moved to a new house in a different town. Starting at a new elementary school in 5th grade was tough, especially when you're the new kid. The other kids already had their cliques, and I felt like an outsider. But then I met Sam and Ryan. Sam was a kid from the neighborhood, and we hit it off right away. Ryan, on the other hand, was a bit strange. He lived in the corner house at the opposite end of the block, and his house always gave me the creeps. It looked run down, with no grass and boxes of junk scattered everywhere. Despite my reservations, I went to Ryan's house to play video games one day. His basement smelled like it hadn't been cleaned in years, but we had fun playing Grand Theft Auto. Still, something about Ryan made me uncomfortable. He was too clingy, too eager to be my friend. I tried to distance myself from Ryan, but he kept showing up at my house uninvited. One night, I woke up to find him climbing through my window, claiming his parents were fighting and he needed a place to sleep. I was terrified and told him to leave, but he wouldn't take no for an answer. After that incident, I told my parents everything. They tried talking to Ryan's parents, but they were no help. Ryan just kept coming back, knocking on my window in the middle of the night, and even shattering it once. My dad chased him off, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Ryan was dangerous. Who knows what he might have done if my dad hadn't intervened. Thankfully, his family eventually moved away, but I still wonder what became of him. Some people are just born bad, and Ryan might have been one of them. As the years passed, I found myself haunted by memories of those unsettling nights. Ryan's eerie presence seemed to linger, casting a shadow over my thoughts whenever I passed by his old house. I couldn't help but wonder what kind of person he had grown into, whether the darkness that lurked within him had consumed him entirely. Despite my best efforts to move on, the memory of Ryan's unsettling behavior continued to gnaw at me. It was as though a lingering sense of unease had taken root in my mind, refusing to be shaken off. Every knock on my window, every sound in the night, sent a shiver down my spine, reminding me of the danger that had once lurked so close to home. In the years that followed, I often found myself retracing the events of that fateful period, searching for answers to questions that seemed to have no clear resolution. What had driven Ryan to such disturbing behavior? Was it simply a cry for attention, or was there something darker lurking beneath the surface? Despite my best efforts to bury the memories, they continued to resurface with a persistent tenacity. It was as though Ryan's presence lingered in the shadows, a constant reminder of the darkness that had once threatened to consume me. As time passed and the wounds of the past began to heal, I found solace in the knowledge that Ryan was no longer a part of my life. Yet even now, I can't help but wonder what became of him, whether the demons that haunted him had finally been laid to rest, or whether they still lingered, waiting to strike once more.